Goodness.
Let's see if this is on. Good morning. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, testing. Good morning. In 8 years of doing meetings at the Wilson Center, this is the first time I have laryngitis. And probably the first time I will actually wholly depend on the microphone. Those of you that know me, I usually your hair's blowing back, I'm so loud. Welcome, my name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum here at the Wilson Center. I know there are about half folks here are kind of new faces, so I should let you know the Wilson Center, we were created in 1968 by Congress as a memorial to our 28th president, a policymaker and a scholar. And in his spirit, we bring together both the scholarly and policy community. So that's you guys. Did you know that? You were scholarly and policy-like? Okay. We all the projects and programs focus on foreign policy areas, and the China Environment Forum is now celebrating its 10th year of bringing together government, NGO, business, researchers, World Banky types, who focus on energy and environmental issues in China. And today, we're talking about energy in China. And I think that those of you that watch the papers have probably noticed that China's air and energy problems have been making a lot of news, and most of it tends to be kind of bad news, at least in terms of, at least from the Chinese perspective, of course, that, the China supposedly surpassed the U.S. in CO2 emissions this year. Beijing's struggle to clean up its air in time for the Olympics we had a meeting on this a couple months ago, but it's all the headlines. I get constantly getting calls from journalists. I don't know if you get these calls too, where they want to say, so will it be clean? I'm like, I don't know. Let's see. There's also issue that the Chinese government admitted earlier in the year that they did not meet their 2006 energy efficiency goals. The World Bank and OECD released, or World Bank, I don't know if that report has come out yet, but there's a lot of talk about statistics on the number of people who die early from respiratory illnesses linked to pollution in China. The numbers are between 600 and 750,000 a year. OECD predicts that if there's no significant improvement in air quality in China, that health costs of air pollution could cost the country 13% of their GDP by 2020. And then, of course, there's the climate change talks. Remember that? China, big player, supposedly maybe not really willing to do as much on CO2. So the news has been kind of bad. But I think that there are also a lot of stories on China's energy and air that we don't always hear. I'm not saying that the news media is bad newsmongers, but there's a lot of quiet things going on in the policy sphere and in terms of projects, particularly with international projects, that are forming a foundation for China probably being better with its energy efficiency and air pollution. The Chinese government prioritizes it, but we know that there's a lot of difficulties. We have two speakers here today who, you'll be glad to know, actually have voices and won't be squeaking at you and sounding... I deluded myself that I maybe sound a little bit like Mae West, but who knows? Half the room doesn't know who Mae West is, probably. We've got two old friends of mine. We've got Jonathan Sinton, who I used to kind of hang with him more when you were at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, came out here, spoke a few years ago on indoor air pollution. So he's a scientist. Don't be scared. He's actually now a bureaucrat. So maybe that's kind of a doubly scary combination. But don't be scared. Jonathan's quite smart, has a wry sense of humor, and he is now the China Program Manager for the International Energy Agency's Office of Global Energy Dialogue. And he's going to be talking about how China is responding to energy challenges, focusing, of course, now on his work at the IEA. But note in the Q&A, he's got his you can basically ask him anything about China's energy later, particularly coal. He's like, ah. And you could probably ask this guy almost anything, too, in terms of energy in China. Been working in China for 25 years, more or less, and much of that focusing on energy efficiency. Hopefully, I don't know if you're going to brag about it in your talk, but I think you were probably the main force behind China creating the ESCOs through a World Bank project. And he could tell you about that. But I think that his title, officially, to make him official, he's the energy sector leader at the East Asia Transport and Energy Unit at the World Bank. And as I said, he's got huge amounts of experience working in China on energy efficiency. We're going to start out with Jonathan, and he's got a PowerPoint. And then he's going to be a Luddite, like me, and he's not going to have a PowerPoint. And you will then be all kind of obedient, nice people and listen to him talk? Yes? Nodding? Okay. Thank you very much. And let's welcome our speakers. Oh, yes. I announced that closer to the time. Or should I do it now? I'll do it closer to the time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's true, I am an international bureaucrat, and part of my purpose in coming here today is to show you that I do have a face. And most of us do, and it's a pleasure to come here and show it to you. After all, you are helping to pay my salary over there in Paris. You and citizens of the 26 other member countries of the IEA. So it's important to come around and let you know what we're doing. As the desk officer for China, I spend a good deal of my time in Beijing and other destinations in China. And I'm assuming that many of you, if you haven't been to China or frequently go to China, at least come from China. So I probably don't need to emphasize the importance of looking at China. And you don't need to be convinced that it's important and that it's important for the U.S. to be engaged in China. Recently, we had Professor Peter Nolan from Cambridge University come to the IEA. In his view, and I think it's shared by many, the U.S.-China relationship will be one that helps to very deeply define this century. It's certainly a proposition that I take very seriously, otherwise I would not have devoted my professional career to working with China as an American. And right now we have a very important, probably unprecedented opportunity to work with China on energy issues, energy efficiency, renewables, energy security. It's you can't listen to a speech from a top leader in China without hearing about energy issues, environmental issues, energy efficiency. There are a lot of programs that are rolling out now. Bob's going to talk about them later. There's expanding staffing at the national and local levels in China. New people coming in who need to be trained up. There's a hunger for lessons from outside of China on how to move forward with energy policy. The shape of China's future energy policy is being forged right now, and we have an opportunity that really needs to be taken to work constructively with China, both for our own benefit and for China's as well. And as I said, this is going to have a tremendous impact on the rest of the world. So engaging China bilaterally, multilaterally, through organizations like the World Bank and the IEA is extraordinarily important. And the IEA has been working with China for about 20 years now, but it was only last year that the governing board took the decision to make China, India, and Russia the top priorities for outreach and put together a plan for more constructively bringing China, India, and Russia more deeply into the work of the agency. And that is making my life very busy. It'd be nice to have 3 or 4 or 5 more like me. Well, maybe not exactly like me, but
there's only one of you.
Oh, well, you think. But there are 2 motivations that really stand out for this, and one is security of global energy markets, and the other, of course, is climate change. It's no longer possible to maintain stability in world energy markets without reference to these 3 countries, and it's certainly not possible to talk about reducing the growth of or limiting emissions of greenhouse gases without reference, without bringing these countries into it. I'm just going to talk about China today, of course. I want to be clear. China is not an opponent. It's our partner in this, and we have to look at it this way in a very constructive fashion. The reasons for China's growing prominence now lie within its borders and beyond its borders. It's participating in energy and technological systems that were pioneered by the U.S. and by other already developed countries. And it's doing so on a resource base that's rich in coal and not a lot else, at least in per capita terms. China's prominence is a new thing for most of us, or at least those of us who were not alive during the early Qing dynasty. And it's taking some getting used to. It takes a while for us to get used to it, for the Chinese to get accustomed to it. I'm not going to go into that right now. I'm not a political scientist, and so I don't think I have any new insights to offer you on that. But I think it's very important for all of us to keep in mind that it's in our respective self-interest to find common solutions to common problems. China's energy problems are the world's energy problems. Challenges. I've already mentioned energy security, climate change. I'm just going to stick with those, and I'm going to illustrate those with some material from the World Energy Outlook that was released this year, which focused on China and India. Fatih Birol, the chief economist at the IEA, leads this project every year. He came whirling through Washington not so long ago talking about this. Some of you may already be familiar with it, so forgive me if this is material that you've already seen before. There'll be other material as well. I'll start by trying to figure out how to operate this thing. Okay. How can I go back one here? Use the arrow keys. Which arrow? Okay. There we go. That helped. Sorry. Maybe I should have been a Luddite myself. Okay. All right. So, looking out into the future, China is going to be a tremendous contributor over the next 25 years to everything to do with energy. Over 40%. Let me explain. This shows results from the reference scenario of the World Energy Outlook. The reference scenario is a scenario of essentially frozen policy. If policy today did not change at all, what would happen over the next 25 years? It does not include policies that are being contemplated but have not yet been implemented. It's fundamentally different from what might be considered a baseline scenario or reference scenario in Beijing, where achievement of targets that have been laid out in the 11th Five-Year Plan and other plans are, of course, achieved. They are not in this baseline scenario. A bit of a point of contention with our colleagues in Beijing. We all understand what that's about, and so if you've seen any back and forth based on that, then it just lies in this fundamental difference here. In any case. Primary energy demand globally, over 40% of the growth from between 2005 and 2030 would come from China. In terms of coal, it's much greater. About 3/4 of incremental coal demand would come from China, primarily for power generation. Currently, about half of China's coal goes for power generation, and that amount is going to continue increasing. And oil demand, about 1/4 would come from China. Not all that surprising when you consider that China has about 1/4 of the world's population, or at least when you combine with the U.S. it does. And oil imports as well. Because of the heavy use of coal, over half of incremental CO2 emissions would come from China. Now, this is emissions over that period. I should point out in terms of cumulative emissions, by the end of this period, China and India together would be responsible for about 20% of cumulative emissions from the Industrial Revolution to 2030. Currently, that proportion stands at about 10%. So, and for the OECD, the current percentage is about 60%. By 2030, it would be 50%. So, even with this massive contribution to incremental emissions, it still pushes that figure of cumulative emissions, which is what the climate responds to, a bit more slowly. So, China's future is in coal. Its present is in coal, its past is in coal, and it's going to stay that way. When I started working on Chinese energy issues a few years after Bob did, that was already quite clear. And even as oil use rises a great deal, gas and renewables, it's still a story of coal. Other renewables which get a lot of play here are still at the very top of this chart, still barely visible by the 2030 period. Energy systems have a huge amount of momentum. They change over scales of decades. Nobody should expect quick results, a quick switch away from fossil fuels towards renewables. Possibly by the end of our lifetimes, we will see a reversal in this, but over the period of this rather short long-term scenario to 2030, it's not going to happen. And China's consumption structure is going to remain focused on industry is going to remain the biggest, although by the end of this period, it's going to be somewhat smaller. Industrial energy use is dominated by heavy industry, steels, metals, building materials, chemicals, and that will remain true at the end of this forecasting period as well. So the situation 20-some years from now is going to remain similar to today. Now, this is a reference scenario. There's a lot that can be done. I'm going to talk a little bit about oil now before turning back to CO2 emissions and coal. Over the medium term and over the long term, China is going to be a big driver of oil demand. Let's look here at the pale blue bars here. That's incremental oil demand over the 2006 to 2011 period. Asia, mostly China, is about twice as large as North America, which is also significant. Also twice as large as the Middle East. As some of you may be aware, the oil-producing countries are the fastest-growing oil consumers. We should be looking to the Middle East not just for oil, but also as a vast reservoir of untapped potential for energy efficiency. The more efficient they are, the better able they will be to supply the needs of other countries. That's an aside, but it's an important point that's only going to grow in importance. Of course, I need not stress the importance of efficiency in China to avert to reduce this sort of outcome. In the longer term, these are additions to oil consumption in China and India, and we're looking at on the order of 17 million barrels per day more oil in 2030 than now. The high growth scenario, that blue bit at the top, refers to a scenario in which growth in China and India is 1.5 percentage points faster over the projection period. The average for the reference scenario is 6%. At 7.5%, there would be an additional very large growth in demand for oil. A lot of this, of course, is being propelled by sales of motor vehicles. China's already overtaken Japan. Around about 2015, vehicle sales in China are projected to overtake the United States. And right now, vehicle ownership levels are somewhere in the neighborhood of what they were in the U.S. around World War I. So there is, from that perspective, a bit of potential for growth. Of course, there's not a lot of room to put more cars. Okay. So, what does this mean for security? There have been concerns expressed about whether there will be enough oil to supply China's burgeoning demand along with everybody else's, and that seems to be the answer to that is a provisional yes, but it requires a great deal investments in place in the oil-producing countries, and it requires a great deal of focus on efficiency in transport, not just in China, but in all consuming nations. One of the possible outcomes that the World Energy Outlook points to is a possible supply-demand imbalance, kind of a crunch that might push prices up by about 2015, unless supply investments are forthcoming, and efficiency investments are as well. Now, as China and India continue to import more and become more reliant on imports, then their needs for stocks are going to rise as well. China's the sixth largest oil producer in the world after Mexico. Like the U.S., it is a big energy producer. Chinese officials like to say we're over 90% self-sufficient in energy, and that's quite true from an overall perspective. But what moves markets is not that overall number, but import dependence for particular fuels. And in terms of oil, virtually all incremental demand is going to be coming from imports. Very similar for gas, despite some large new discoveries. And that means that China is needs to work very hard to build its reserves. It's doing so now, even with a very high price of oil. They're very cagey about this. This is oil security and oil reserves policy is a primary focus of the IEA's work with China. It's very difficult right now to obtain information about stocks, as those of you who followed the issue probably already know. There are one of the main sources of uncertainty is the failure of China to report stock levels, commercial stock levels, government stock levels, and there are various explanations for this. Now, China is a participant in something called the Joint Oil Data Initiative. It's based in Riyadh. The IEA provides technical support for this, and members submit information on oil supply, oil demand, oil imports, and oil stocks. China is one of the better participants in this, at least regarding all the information except stocks. So we've been talking with the National Oil Reserve Office about this, which lies within NDRC. We've talked with the National Bureau of Statistics about this repeatedly. It's just such a wonderful subject we can't seem to ever get off it. But clearly China is not ready to release this information. It's not ready to talk about what system it has in place for responding to emergencies. It's a very long conversation. It requires a great deal of patience, and they're slowly opening up and showing a great deal of willingness to learn. Those of you who know about the reserves know that the first phase is all above ground storage tanks. The second phase, they're considering underground storage as well. And they're very eager to learn from the U.S. and other countries that do have underground storage, not just in terms of the geology and technically how it works, but also management. And they're starting to show signs of accepting the principles that IEA member countries have for management of stocks, starting to say, for instance, that the stocks will be used for making up temporary supply disruptions, and that they won't be used simply to bring down prices, which is, no matter how large your stocks are, is something of a fool's game. Now, I see that I'm running.
You're doing okay.
I'm doing okay on time. Okay. So, as China becomes much larger, the OECD's stockpiles are not going to be enough to be a bomb to world markets should a disruption occur. When the IEA was set up in 1974, the OECD countries used about 3/4 of world oil. That's not that's no longer true, and 25 years from now it will be even less true. So this compares OECD demand with India and China's demand. It takes a long time to build up strategic reserves. The IA member countries have all taken on the order of 15 or 20 years to build up 90 days worth of reserves. Nobody should expect China to build up that level of reserves overnight, particularly with oil much more expensive now than when IA member countries built up their reserves. So while it remains important to keep pushing China along, we need to remember patience, remember our own experience in this regard. Turning to CO2 emissions, most of it coming from coal, I mentioned cumulative emissions, and this is a figure that shows where we stand where we stood in 2005 and where under the World Energy Outlook reference scenario we would stand in 2030. And it's quite quite clear that China's cumulative emissions are going to outpace those of the U.S. But by 2030 would be higher than half the level of the U.S. Japan and India look fairly small by comparison. So China, the United States, as I said, are going to continue to define a lot of things, and what they do together regarding CO2 emissions is going to be very important for the climate that we all share. Okay. Much has been made of various reports that China became the world's largest emitter of CO2 last year, if you include cement emissions, or possibly this year. The estimates that were prepared for the World Energy Outlook that show China surpassing the U.S. in annual emissions this year. Very interesting headline number, but regardless of whether it's last year, this year, next year, 2010, it doesn't change the basic problem that we all face. There's a lot of CO2 going into the atmosphere, and a great deal less needs to go into the atmosphere from all of us. Coal, this is simply a repeat of the slide that I showed you before, except in terms of CO2 emissions. Oil and gas, very small, but it's coal for power generation in China and India that are going to be really pushing things along. So if there's one sector that you want to focus on, that would be power generation, particularly coal-fired power generation. How to switch away from coal to cleaner sources of energy, and how to use the coal that is going to be used, that is being used, better. The power plants that are being built in China now are going to be operating for decades. It's very unlikely they're going to be taken offline anytime soon. If you watch Chinese television news, you will occasionally see rather dramatic pictures of small power plants being dynamited. There have been quite a few smaller power plants that have been closed down this year, some of them quite violently. So there has been a problem in past campaigns to close inefficient and polluting facilities for them to quietly reopen when the winds of the campaign sweep past. Well, this is sort of a permanent solution. It's impossible, however, to dynamite all of the small power plants, and one can't imagine the 600, sort of a slightly less than wonderfully efficient 600 megawatt supercritical unit that's being built today suffering the same fate 10 or 15 years from now. So what's going in now in China's power plants is going to be around with us for a long time, and is going to be a very big contributor to these brown bars here. Okay. And China's increase in power generation capacity dominates the world scene. It looks like the pace this year has slowed a bit from the rather incredible figure in 2006, over 110 gigawatts this year. Preliminary figures are on the order of 80. We won't really know until sometime next year, and things look set to slow down a bit next year as well. But it's still quite a bit. 80 gigawatts is the size of well, a major OECD country, shall we say? So when we look at what's the discussion of alternatives, a target of 40 gigawatts of nuclear by 2020, it looks fairly small in comparison to the 60, 70, 80 gigawatts per year of coal-fired capacity going in place. Thank you. The target for wind, for instance, is 30 gigawatts by 2020. So that would put it on the order of the size of nuclear, but still a small, just a fraction of what's going in, what's being built in 1 year. So there is an impression that China's power plants are terribly inefficient and terribly polluting, and certainly many of them are. But with the new build is much better than older plants and much closer to world class. Throughout the projection period of the World Energy Outlook, we're going to see a gradual convergence of efficiencies of new build with OECD new build, which is minuscule by comparison, by the way, and slower convergence of average efficiency as well. So this shows that China's new build is on the order of 38% efficient. These are the larger supercritical units. A few ultra supercritical units are starting to go in as well. And there's a big push in China to put in more efficient plants. Space is being made in new plants to put in flue gas desulfurization, and older plants are starting to be required to retrofit. I'll skip through this because Bob is going to be talking more about efficiency, but this just gives you a sense that there is a lot going on in the arena of efficiency, not just in the power sector, where it is key, but also in end-use sectors as well. If China is able to push efficiency, it's going to have a tremendous impact on its energy use and on its CO2 emissions. Simply putting in place stricter standards for air conditioners and refrigerators could save by 2020 a Three Gorges Dam, or two of them, by 2030, and that's just for two classes of appliances. China already has is manufacturing relatively efficient appliances, but the average efficiency could be improved a great deal. So, China is not necessarily highly motivated by the climate change issue. I hardly need say, but local air pollution is quite important. Those of you who are following what's happening in Beijing and planning for improving air quality for the Olympics next year know that this is a big driver of decision making, and efficiency policies could not only reduce CO2 but significantly SO2 and NOx as well. From SO2 mostly from stationary sources, from power plants, and NOx mostly from mobile sources. Okay. And CO2 emissions could be brought down a great deal as well. This shows the difference in CO2 emissions between the reference scenario and the alternative policy scenario, which doesn't even push efficiency as fast as many people think it could. And this shows that efficiency measures. There's a problem with the coloration here, I'm afraid, but end-use electricity measures, which go back to reduced power plant fuel usage, and end-use fuel efficiency measures, including, for instance, better, stricter standards for fuel economy standards for light and heavy-duty vehicles, could work miracles in this regard, and it would certainly have a huge impact on global emissions if China and India were to move towards that alternative policy scenario, and if other countries were to as well. Globally, emissions could be reduced by about 19% compared to the reference scenario. That's equivalent to China's total emissions today, would result in a leveling out of CO2 emissions and put us back towards a path, back on a path towards sustainability. There's a lot that needs to be done within our own countries, as well as in China, and cooperation with China is going to help make that alternative policy scenario much more likely. I've talked a bit about energy security. We have long-running cooperation with China on that. Energy statistics as well is a big tooth in the gears that meshes the IEA with China. I can talk more about that later. There's a lot of cooperation on analysis, scenarios, and indicators. The World Energy Outlook was prepared in collaboration with Chinese researchers, although it's certainly true that they do not share many of the views that have come out in the World Energy Outlook. We talk with the Chinese about policy, sharing best practices. We receive numerous delegations from Chinese, often coming over at their own expense, to learn about what's going on in member countries. I'm sure you see many delegations here as well. And there's a good deal of cooperation on energy technology research and development. That's facilitated by the IEA, but isn't carried out by the IEA. So I'd be happy to talk more about cooperation, but first it's important to hear what Bob has to say.
Yes. Okay, we can applaud this guy. Wasn't too bad for a scientific bureaucrat, right? And I wanted to give you all a heads up, just so you know. In probably 20 minutes, by the time he finishes his talk, there's going to be a fire drill in this building. We have received permission to stay in our room. Yay! Which means, though, we will be slightly tortured with a nice little robotic voice. But we're going to, so you all stay here, right? Okay, but just so you know, the alarm goes off, don't panic. If it's a real fire, someone's supposed to come and tell us. But, okay? So, don't be alarmed, but we'll kind of continue on and do questions in between the nice female robotic voice talking outside in the hall, okay? On that note, you get to talk until the fire alarm goes.
Well, good morning to everyone. I haven't been here for some 5 years. It's nice to be back. Today I was going to very informally give you some personal opinions, not really representing my bank, but representing me. And to give you a bit of a flavor about some of the things that are going on in China, especially this year, and what looks to be happening next year, and especially on the energy efficiency front. First thing I'd like to say is that the reference scenario is clearly not an option. I mean, this is not something that China could survive, or the world. That direction of development isn't going to work. And it's a question of how do you put less resource-intensive development modes in place and implement them? And that's China's challenge, and I think it's a challenge for the world in general. If you look at China, has maybe almost 5 times as many people as the U.S. The income per capita in China, I don't know the latest numbers, but it must be an eighth or a ninth of what it is in the U.S. These people want to develop. They have.
It's $2,000 per capita.
Okay, and then the U.S. is what, 17 or something like that? So that would be about right, wouldn't it? These people want to enjoy a better life, but in order to get there, the way that things developed in the West aren't going to work. And I think this type of, what you hear more and more out of Chinese scholars and out of the leadership is a drive for less resource-intensive development. And you start to see this in many ways. My hope is that this can be put on the fast track, and many of the disasters that you would begin to see if you follow the road down the reference scenario can at least be mitigated or avoided. The problem is huge, though. If you look at the numbers, anyone who's analyzed these numbers, you can see is really a massive problem. So my feeling is the best thing is to bite off chunks and to try and see how can pieces of the reference scenario be mitigated, or how can you move down towards that alternative scenario, or even better than that. So I want to talk about energy efficiency in particular. This is the one I know well, and it's one that's also a really key part of the Chinese program now. I've worked at the bank for many years. I've worked on China for many years. I've worked on energy for many years. I have never seen any government push energy efficiency as hard as Chinese government is pushing right now. I've never seen anything probably even close. Perhaps in Japan, when they did Project Sunshine, these things in 1980, was something similar. But this is truly a massive undertaking. I first heard about this target. Let me tell you just sort of in a personal way, as I went about my own work, how I began to run into this. In 2005, I began to talk in China about, okay, we're going to have this new target of reducing energy consumption per unit GDP by 20% in the next 5-year plan. So it's 5 years to reduce by 20%. That's the energy consumption per unit of national output value to GDP. People were calculating how to achieve this, and there was many models going out, and it was becoming very obvious it was not going to be easy. When you look at energy efficiency, there's usually two pieces that you have to analyze. One is a structural factor, which is what are you producing and how intensive is that production, or is the structure of your economy. And the other is then the physical energy savings, the energy use per ton of steel or per passenger kilometer or so. It was clear it was going to be difficult. When I saw about, I think beginning 2006, when we first looked at this target, we were all saying, well, we have 5-year plan targets all the time. Who knows? This looks like a stretch target. Maybe this will happen. Maybe it won't. We'll see. Some 6 months or 3, I can't remember, about a half year in, saw a circular from the State Statistical Bureau and the National NDRC, National Development Reform Commission, saying exactly how this is going to be calculated at provincial level, at sector level. And knowing something about these statistics, I looked at that and smiled and said, well, this one is not going to be easy to cheat. This is pretty tight. Early 2006, I was traveling in Yunnan, and the day before, the officials had come down from Beijing to negotiate that province's target, how much they would have to, what would their contribution to be to the 20% reduction. And massive negotiation. Yunnan wanted to get 14%, and they had finally gotten 17%. And their problem was non-ferrous industry is huge in that province, a big part of their energy consumption. And they said, our plants are almost all new. We've imported many of this production lines from Japan. This is state-of-the-art. We don't know what to do. It's impossible. The only thing we can do is we can think of doing is changing the structure of what we produce. So produce less bar and more wire, try to get more value added and work on it on that side. And this is where they were going. So they had to pull in the main enterprises and said, okay, we're going to have to look at what you're producing because we have to meet this target. So first time I ever heard about anything like that. And but it was really starting to look at that depth, sort of a structural change. When I went back to Beijing that same trip, our lead economist in the Beijing office said, have you seen this new export tax on energy-intensive commodities. If you're going to export steel or other energy-intensive commodities, you're going to be taxed by central government, who's trying to discourage those exports from now on. And so this is coming, and I said, I've never seen any country do that. Maybe some have done that. That was news to me. So I started to pay a little bit more attention. In early 2007, I think it was about a week into January, when the circular came out from central government and hit the newspapers in Beijing, that the target for 2006, if you're going to make the 20%, you have to make 4 point something every year, that they had achieved 1.3, or 1.33, I think was the exact. And so they were not going to make the target. Really intense discussion started then. I was listened to colleagues who were working on the two programs, national programs, that were starting to roll out then. One is a 1,000 enterprises program, and that is the 1,000 largest energy-consuming industrial enterprises in China, all individually required to sign some kind of an agreement as to how they would contribute to the target reduction, exactly what they would do on energy consumption to reduce, et cetera, and how they would implement this, and the state providing a large amount of assistance for that. Now, these enterprises, it's not trivial. This is 30% of China's total energy consumption in those 1,000 enterprises. So they're beginning to roll this program out. And at the same time, they had in the 5-year plan a broad whole set of 10, what they call 10 energy conservation construction or major activities they're starting to roll out. So I said, okay, this is getting serious. But what really impressed me was in June this year, when the premier called everyone in, had a massive meeting, said this is not going to work, banged the table, said this is our government's responsibility to the Zhongguo Renmin, the people of China, and this is going to be done. And the level of activity has come since that. I mean, there's another circular released, all these things you can find on the web. State Council comprehensive work plan for the energy conservation and reducing pollution. And the intensity coming from that I really impressed me. Putting money on the table, defining institutions, and especially defining responsibilities at a high level as to who is accountable for what. In October, our bank was asked, what can we do more on energy efficiency? We have a pretty robust lending pipeline on energy efficiency and renewable energy and so forth, and they wanted more. They asked us to a brainstorming session in Beijing where they brought every province there, and to discuss how more can be done on energy efficiency using World Bank and other agencies like us. Energy conservation law was passed that week in October, a new law with more teeth than the previous one. Ministry of Finance, I saw last month, has put in place a fund of 23.5 billion yuan. That's, how much is that? That's over $3 billion for 2007 alone. Next year will be more. New energy law has now been sent out for the for opinion. So I think you probably can find that one on the web too. That one's now come out for opinion of or general opinion before it's finally discussed. So this is what I've seen, and I would also like to take you through a little bit of some of the details as we started to look at the provincial projects. My bank, we started to look at, traveled and talked to quite a few provinces. I can give you a little flavor for what is happening at that level. Governors have been asked to sign basically in their blood that they will meet the targets that have been set down for Beijing, and these guys are quite, when you meet with them, they come out at a senior level and they're quite, you must help me. What do we do? Each province has set up a team of the senior people at the provincial level under the governor to see how to meet the targets. They're also passed down to every prefecture, every county, and all of the major enterprises. Coming out of June, the performance evaluation of government officials now requires an evaluation as to how their units performed on this. So the governors, the Shenzhen, the county magistrates, and so forth, this is part of their review as either government or party officials. Each province now is putting together special funds. They're sort of like the MOF fund, the Ministry of Finance fund. I found pretty interesting. I just found yesterday what was those 23.5 billion yuan were to be used for. 7 billion was for key energy conservation projects. All of these funds are used as grant funds, as an incentive type of fund, so to top up interest rates or to provide some kind of subsidy or to pay for development costs or so forth. 6.5 billion for wastewater treatment in cities in western and middle China. 2 billion for subsidy of the social impact of eliminating low efficiency industries. This is what John was talking about. 3 billion for statistics and supervision. Now that's a lot of money to spend in 1 year, and that tells you about how the monitoring is going to go on this. Pollution control in 3 rivers and 3 lakes, 5 billion. Then you see it at the provincial level. So I spent some time in Shandong about 4 weeks ago. They have a special fund they put in place, which was 2 billion yen, 300 million of that for energy efficiency. All this has to be spent this year. Shandong, also very interesting, they have it's the energy conservation and the pollution control targets. I mean, there's both. I'm just talking about the energy efficiency one, but also for SO2 and COD, very rigorous targets. Shandong got for SO2 required to reduce absolute level. This is not per unit GDP. This is total emissions of SO2 in Shandong province have to be reduced by 20% in 5 years. 20%. And that's an absolute term. And so that's a tough one. For Shandong, I think, is number 1 or number 2 in coal consumption now. It's one or the other. So they put this 800 million for that. Then going down to each prefecture and each county also putting in money, another billion of that. These, of those of you who work in the government, these are all government allocations straight off the budget. But they're by year, just like, say, if you're in the U.S. government, you're getting a congressional approval for your budget for FY whatever. This is the same. So it's a big minus in the way this works, too, and that this is use or lose money. Next year, then you see what happens. But still, putting money where the mouth is. Second thing I want to mention is a program for structural adjustment in industry. This I was alluding to before. This work started in 2002 with some circulars coming out of the central government, especially on what to do about the inefficient plant, the most well-known one, the small thermal power, but also many different kinds of industrial plant. So very strong words, very strong sort of you must do or we will find some way to get you type. Didn't work. And I remember talking to a friend, the director in NDRC, who said, we issued all this and no one pays attention. What are we going to do? 2006, they reissued, this time with some real teeth in it. You don't do, we cut off the power. You don't do, we'll take the permits and no credit, to the enterprises involved. When I talked there was a group from Jiangsu came through our bank about 6 weeks ago. Maybe some other people in town also met with them. They had used some of their provincial money to do an output-based incentive program for eliminating. They were working especially on small cement in that province, which is a huge industry. Okay, we will pay you, similar to what John was saying about the dynamiting, once we have confirmed that the site has been bulldozed and the equipment's destroyed. Otherwise, then we will pay the incentive payment. Until then, we don't believe you. Shandong, similar. So this one is, they are really pushing on that. And I think it's probably the right thing to do. Thousand Enterprises, let me say a few things. I found this one also rather fascinating. Hebei has the most. It has 122. Shandong has 103. So I asked them, well, so what do you do? I also asked the Shanghai people in particular. Well, they went through each province. First, there's a discussion about basic energy consumption measures, et cetera, and there's a signing of an agreement about what will happen with energy consumption. So then there's a benchmarking, auditing exercise in terms of what kinds of projects to put forward. Those are then also checked as to whether or not it's going to be able to realize the responsibility contract that's been signed to the enterprise. And then there's the investment phase, where there's a lot of the funds that have been made available by the province, or through the banks, or through the state bond issues coming out of the central government. I was impressed by how far some of these have gotten along. I mean, many of them are really in the investment phase starting, and how rigorous was the process of trying to keep track of what energy use had been, what it would be, et cetera. There's a huge demand, as you can imagine, for auditing skills, for supervision skills, for benchmarking, for anyone who has any technical capacity in this area is now on the night shift until further notice, I think. I've got 2 minutes before that buzzer goes off.
Well, they said 10-ish.
Okay.
You might get more.
Let me just say, since some of you may have known about the ESCO work that we've done in China, we started in a long time ago. Pam will remember some. But we started in the mid-'90s. This was a completely new idea at that time. First time I remember discussing with a group, and once again in Shandong, I was saying, well, we're looking at ways that you could make money through energy conservation. I mean, this is actually a quite profitable business. It's just how do you package it? And I remember a fellow came up to me afterwards and says, well, we know how to make money, but we're embarrassed to make money. So this is the old China, where, you know, energy conservation, this is a social obligation, social responsibility. To be a government person and to encourage making money on that was, can we do that? The answer was very loud, yes, you can do that. The government backed this program, and we put in, through a lot of effort, we developed the 3 MCs, which now have, these were pilot companies, have worked out quite well. The project is now closed, and now it's become a whole industry in China. So we have, of these ESCOs, somewhere between 60 and 100 that are operating, growing very fast. The investments 2005 were 250 million, 2006 280 million. Chinese are saying maybe double this year. Could be $500 million industry. I'm not quite that optimistic. We have a survey going on. We'll see about that. Very lively business. In terms of, and to me, fascinating in terms of the different kinds of ideas that come out. Some large shareholders, some of the power companies beginning to get involved in that, and also many small companies with a clever idea. I can talk more about that.
Maybe no. Say what an ESCO is, because I don't know. Does everyone know what an ESCO is? Some people don't. They're like,
okay, well, look at it this way. Energy conservation investments in this country, in any country, there's many of them that, if you look at the financial returns, they're very high. It's like putting a CFL in your house. The return on that, on your electricity bill, is going to give you a very high rate of return. Now, that doesn't mean that you do it, because for many reasons, maybe you don't know about the CFL, and maybe you don't care to save $1, and maybe you just haven't gotten around to it. This is the nature of energy conservation projects. They're like that in industry, the same. Unless it's a really core part of the, there we go.
Yep.
Just continue.
For people who didn't hear me announce, this is a fire drill. GSA has given us permission to stay here. And the talking and flashing are supposed to go on for 5 minutes, and then it will evidently stop. And it doesn't seem too bad. It's not too bad. It's okay, you guys? You've heard. Some of you that live in Cubeland have noisier neighbors than this, right? Right. Okay. So why don't you just go on ahead?
So this is the nature of energy conservation projects, many of them, that they're financially attractive but don't get picked up for many reasons. It's true everywhere, especially true in China. So one of the ideas to try to capture this is a company called Enesco, who makes it his business to do energy conservation. It goes to the customers and says, I will help you identify energy conservation projects. I will prepare the project. I'll do all the design work. I will do all the procurement of the equipment. In many cases, I will finance the whole thing. All you have to do is you have to give me a share of the savings that is generated. If it doesn't save any energy, then you don't pay me anything. But if it saves like I know it's going to save because I know my business, you have to pay me 50% or 80% of that until you've paid me off, and with a pretty good profit, please. And then you can keep all the equipment yourself. So it's a packager, designer, and it works because the projects are quite profitable. In China, then we started with 3 companies who piloted this business and tried it out in the late 90s with the first kinds of contracts and so forth. This business started especially in the U.S. and Canada going back to 1970s. Interesting, in the U.S. it was pushed primarily by government programs in the building sector, so schools or hospitals or even government buildings, how to improve energy efficiency in those facilities. Then it was allowed to have companies that could come in on contract and do that, and that's how that business was born. In China, business developed in a very different way, focused especially on industry, the big consumer, also now in buildings, but supported and developed in a Chinese way. So I can tell you more about the difference, but you know. Yeah. The idea caught on. I mean, it makes money, and if you're able to develop a good business plan, to be able to find the resources to get initial investment and so forth, these companies have begun to grow. And with the current hard push on energy efficiency in general, then this sector has started to boom. And I think it's one thing we're proud of, that it was able to start something like that and then to really see it take off.
And now the World Bank, it's on its own now. Your baby's launched.
Well, most of these have nothing to do with us. We have 2 things in the bank that we help with. One is we helped the Chinese make an association of these ESCOs. And this association is quite dynamic group. Again, they have a wonderful website. If you have to read Chinese for most of these websites, unfortunately, but they do have a nice website. And so we've supported them. I think we have 1 more year of support for them. And then we also have a guarantee program running through one of China's largest guarantee companies, which provides a partial risk guarantee to banks to give loans to ESCOs. So rather than support these ESCOs directly, our bank tried to make a way where we could support indirectly, and then increasingly the Chinese financial system be able to pick up, and these companies learn how to get loans on their own and so forth. It's interesting that in the Chinese context, a lot of the investment capital actually come from shareholders or from friends of shareholders. So a lot of the investment capital then coming through informally through various investors, and not as much through the banking system as I had originally thought. I imagine people may have some questions. I can talk about lots of things if people are interested. I want to say just one last thing to finish on this, and that is I really believe that China has to take another road. I think that at a very senior level, there's a deep understanding of that, and it's a question of how others can help. China is going to do. They're going to try. They're going to push hard. They're going to make hideous mistakes because of the nature of the problem, and I think that it's an exciting area, especially for people who are just beginning their work life. This is something that is going to go for decades, and it's going to be something new. It's not going to be something we've seen before.
Okay, well, good. Well, let's thank him for that. And I have Mayu and Lyndon with the microphones. Mayu, can you go the very back, Ruth first, I guess? Yeah, and yes, the woman there. And when you do talk, say your name and affiliation. And stand up, Ruth, if you could, so we can see you up here.
I'm Ruth Greenspan-Bell. I just wanted to follow up the question with a question on the ESCOs. My understanding is that, energy is priced pretty low, and that there's a lot of subsidization. So what's the incentive for somebody to do an ESCO? I can understand it if energy costs are really pushing you hard, but that's not my understanding of what's happening there.
Okay, good question. I think energy costs are not low in China in terms of their production cost. There is no subsidy of energy prices. When you look at electricity prices, they are starting to get quite high, 60 fun, 80 fun. I've seen 1 yuan per kilowatt hour prices. You also have pressure of not being able to secure enough, especially on peak. Coal prices are not particularly low. When I was traveling in Anhui province, I was shocked to see they're well above the import parity price from Australia. And I was beginning to wonder because I know what the production costs in Chinese mines are not at all as high as that. I was beginning to wonder the nature of that price difference between what the mine get and what the consumer is paying. But prices are pretty high. Secondly, even since 1990, and high by Chinese standards and by production standards, you can look at very much higher prices. If you go to Cambodia and look at diesel power generation there, it's going to cost 25 or 30 cents. But if you're producing power in China with big economies of scale, it's a bit different. Where was I? Also, even in the early 90s, when a lot of that was not necessarily true, the rate of return on these energy conservation investments is still very high. We did, for the review of these first 3 ESCOs, there was a wonderful review done of 400 of those projects. And so the actual data from all those projects, the cash flow of each of those projects, how much was actually saved, what was invested in, et cetera, who was the host enterprise, what was the technology. The average rate of return is 70%. Okay? So it's not a financial incentive problem. It's a question of how do you pull that off? How do you get the upfront money? 70% over the life of the investment. That's in cost savings. That's not something you see. So when you go to a factory manager, it's true in the U.S. too. You go there and you're looking at something where someone's calculated your how much you're going to save with this technology according to my calculations versus you will have this new facility that is going to look very nice. It's not quite the same. It's people can calculate and say it's the same, the rate of return is the same, but there's something about having a productive asset versus a calculation of cost savings. It's not quite the same thing.
Did you have something to add to this comment or question?
Yes, Bob's quite right. Energy prices to retail consumers are fairly high by world standards. That one major exception, of course, is oil products, refined oil products, where prices are held quite low. This does not necessarily lead to higher oil demand because this policy results in a restriction of supply. Refiners restrict crude runs because every barrel that they refine leads to a loss for them, and so you see the occasional large transfer payments to Sinopec. Sinopec has managed to negotiate two of them. You could look at these as energy subsidies, but they're not something that the retail consumer uses. As retail oil prices are allowed to rise, you might see a somewhat perverse effect of rise in demand as it becomes more rational for the refiners to actually do their job. It's since any price rise is likely to be quite gradual, however, it's unlikely that you're going to see a jump in China's demand as a result of this change in policy.
Okay, got some other questions. Maya, the gentleman in the back, and we'll go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then 5 over there. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. Daniel Lamott from Woodrow Wilson Advisory Board.
Can you hold the mic closer up because
Sure.
we've got a bit of a noise.
Now, in the past 10 years, there's been a lot of investment going into China, foreign direct investments, and they said that a lot of plants, dirty plants, have been shifted over to China, where the production is taking place. To what extent do you have some figures on what percentage that imported technology or imported industry has in terms of their production and emissions? And also, to what extent is this essentially a shell game, meaning that plants from Japan and the United States are being shifted to China now, and then they'll be shifted to, China will shift them to Vietnam or in some other places, and as to sort of push away the problem to somebody else, though?
The pollution haven theory.
There certainly is a certain amount of that going on. 2 weeks ago, I accompanied a Chinese delegation to the Ruhr region in Germany, and we were told that one of the coking plants that had been shut down there, as Germany has closed a lot of its heavy industry and coal mines, was taken apart piece by piece and shipped over to China. And there certainly are a number of instances of this happening, although fewer and fewer. Some of this happened in the 1980s, 1990s, but it's no longer common. So that direct transfer of old equipment to China is it's eye-catching, but I wouldn't say that represents the largest source of new technology for it. A lot of what's being built in China is manufactured in China with licensed technology. If you go to Shanxi now, you'll see a lot of coal enterprises with things like power generation plants, small power generation plants that are using mining tailings, very low heat value stuff. And northern China is a very water poor place, and so a lot of these plants have technology licensed from Germany, where using waterless cooling, essentially large fans. It uses a lot of electricity, but it does not draw on water. This is something that you don't see everywhere in the world, and it gets to the heart of what many in China consider to be the most pressing environmental problem, that is availability of clean water. In terms in overall terms, I think it's true that a lot of the pollution that's occurring in China is a result of transfer of manufacturing to China, but not a direct transfer. We did an estimation for the World Energy Outlook of the percentage of energy use that is attributable to China's exports, and we arrived at a figure of about 28% for 2004. That seems relatively high, but for the same year, China also imported energy-intensive products as well, amounting to about 12% of its total energy consumption. So on a net basis, China is using about 16% of its energy for its net exports. This is very, very high, much higher than the U.S. or even South Korea. That actually is likely that percentage is going to be declining over the projection period as China starts producing a larger fraction of its output for its growing domestic market, and as other countries start to take up the lower value exports that China is providing.
Okay. Lyndon, can you pass the mic to the gentleman there in the blue? Right across the table. Right across the table. Thank you. And then Mark, you'll be next.
Thank you. I'm John McCormick with the Energy Policy Center. Excellent presentations. There's not much in the Bush administration with which I agree. However, there is one thing that I think President Bush has gotten it right, and that's the Asia-Pacific Partnership. 6 countries representing about almost 2/3 of global GNP, about half the world's energy production, about half the world's CO2. The Asia-Pacific Partnership is sort of being held together by string and paper clips, I think, because it's driven in large part by industry's willingness to cooperate. The next administration here in the United States may abandon the Asia-Pacific Partnership, and I think that would be a real failure. Could you address how the World Bank is approaching or is participating in the Asia-Pacific Partnership?
Sure. We're not formally a participant, but I myself and others have met with various groups, been involved, and I also was resource person when it was starting out and so forth. My own personal attitude is that the best way that our bank can help is when it comes to specific activities. So say in the case of U.S. and China, there's a number of activities that are going on, and we try to help those along. There's both the EPA and the DOE ones working in China. We've tried to introduce them to maybe a little bit of a broader context, and also help some with the institutional arrangements and some coordination with the work that we have ongoing. And I guess maybe that follows my own sort of personal bias towards really trying to get into specific things and seeing whether we can deliver them. So I agree with you. There's an opportunity there. I was very impressed by the DOE's desire to work on these energy audits and some of the people that they were planning to use. These were American group that then they were going to work with Chinese groups to do audits of some of these 1,000 enterprises and so forth. And some of the technical staff on the American side that had been arranged are top-notch people. So I was really trying to look for ways that could be taken advantage of, and what they came up with would be financed and so forth. So we tried.
Okay. The IEA is also collaborating with the APP, though it's 7 nations now. Canada has joined, and I think Canada's joining shows a level of interest in the organization that could carry it through a change in administrations. Like the World Bank, we try to engage in specific projects. We have before us a proposed project which we're negotiating with the NDRC to audit 2 power plants in the 200 megawatt class, and we are working with a group under APP to collaborate.
Okay, good. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Moore from the Wilson Center. First, I'd like to thank the speakers for their excellent presentations, and Jennifer for the excellent discotheque effect. That was very lively. Okay, my question. I think it's generally, as economists, if they ever have consensus, and I'm not one, but assert that China needs to maintain an 8 to 10% economic growth rate per year to create the 20 to 25 million new jobs per year to maintain its legitimacy. Otherwise, people might say, you know, if we're in a recession, why do we have the Communist Party telling us what to do all the time? So, and Hu Jintao, in his speech to the 17th Party Congress in October, was very clear about these will be the economic growth rates that we have to maintain for the next 5-year plan. So it's one thing, I believe, for Wen Jiabao to pound on the desk in June and say, you have to be more energy efficient, or to have a 5-year plan that says we have to cut energy consumption by 20% or whatever. But if you don't have a corresponding either reduction or less pressure, in other words, if you have to do both, it seems to me that the end result will be cheating at the Shen level or the prefecture level. In other words, if their jobs really, at the end of the day, you're going to get promoted based on your economic growth rate, not on your cut of sulfur dioxide, then you have a real problem. So my question is there any kind of reduction in pressure for economic growth levels, or are officials supposed to do both? Thank you.
So I think kind of referring to, you were saying that like the green GDP failed, but you were saying that there's this new energy efficiency criteria for officials.
I think this is the challenge. You have to grow. You have to do both. There's no question about it. And I think to say to China, well, the world cannot afford for your economic development is a non-starter, personally. And I think that is the challenge, is how do you increase standard of living, increase people's income, and do it in such a way that the country doesn't choke to death. And this is a long-term, many decade challenge. But not having growth, no, I've not heard that. And frankly, I don't see that.
Okay, raise your hands again because I'm kind of muddled from my cold. I think Marta, okay, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'll keep you straight now. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Marta McClellan from the U.S.-China Commission, and I have 2 questions. The first question is that China has identified a set of industries to promote, the so-called national champions, and several of those industries are highly energy intensive. And so I'm wondering, how can China reconcile that economic policy to develop these industries such as steel, automobiles, airplanes, and also achieve their energy efficiency targets? My second question is a little confrontational, and I apologize for that, but I agree that China has requested and needs assistance in gathering statistics, developing statistical methods. But what is the purpose of that when, after gathering those statistics, the Chinese government makes a political decision not to release those statistics, such as in the World Bank joint report that they decided, to prevent from being released? So how can, in doing cooperation with China on gathering statistics, how do you get beyond the political aspect of that, so to encourage more transparency and improve statistical reporting?
Okay. Flip a coin.
The promotion of national champions is, I would say that the Chinese government would say that it is precisely in line with promoting efficiency. One of the this has to do with industry restructuring, getting rid of smaller, less efficient, more highly polluting facilities, having production taken up by larger, more modern facilities, taking advantages of economies of scale, centralization, better technical capacity, better, closer relations with the government, allows a level of scrutiny of operations that makes it much easier to implement targets for and standards for emissions, for energy efficiency. So I would say that it's probably in line with these overall goals for energy intensity. Regarding statistics, my experience over the years with China at the working level and more recently at the IEA is that there's a great deal of information that's not released publicly, but not necessarily for reasons of state secrets. There's a great deal that one would wish to keep under wraps because it is of rather poor quality. So, and if you look at provincial level statistical energy balances from past years, you see some very poor quality, which is very embarrassing, actually, and could lead to a lot of misleading conclusions. So there's often very little that's nefarious about keeping things under wraps. With regard to oil stocks, the picture is a little bit more complex. There are still many within China who need to be persuaded that a release of oil stock information doesn't go against the strategic interests of China. China is hardly unique in this respect. Saudi Arabia is very cagey about its statistics regarding its oil reserves, regarding its oil stocks, and in various ways can be found around it. Delayed reporting of commercial stocks and so forth. But cooperation on statistics is very important. Right now, China is, you may look at China and say it's not releasing information that it has, but often it has very little to be transparent about. The statistics on consumption in buildings, in transport, are very poor. They're estimates based on a few widely spaced and unreliable points. In order for China to have something to share, they need a great deal of capacity building. A lot of that is happening right now. They're hiring a lot of new energy statisticians. They're being trained up. We're helping with that. And as they adopt methods that have been tried out in other countries, and as they work with us, they'll naturally be sharing a great deal of that information.
Isn't there also an issue that over the years that some of the research centers in China, just more broadly, that collect data have become somewhat for-profit, and that sometimes it's an issue of certain research centers, they don't want to give it away for free? Is that an issue at all with the energy side? Or
certainly, but more and more, they also don't have a lot to give away, and their base of information has narrowed a great deal. So under the planning system, China had full, ideally, or at least in theory, had full reporting of what was going on at every single enterprise, and that's no longer the case. The statistical system has to move to a survey-based system, and China's sort of between two stools at the moment. We're trying to help pull them fully onto the other stool.
Okay. Did you have some comments to her?
Maybe just very quickly. My own feeling about national champion industries and the energy efficiency targets is this gives you a flavor for some of the contradictions that you face as you're moving forward. I mean, some of the movements on industrial policy are done by, run counter to a less resource-intensive kind of goal. If you look at the steel industry, there's over 400 million tons of steel last year. It's mind-boggling. So, I mean, those are basic contradictions. It's not that someone's deciding this and not that. I think you have a complex society that will struggle with these things. On the statistics and transparency, I think a lot of it, I think China's a lot better than when I first started, certainly. I think that the usefulness of statistics is increasing, the amount that is available. The need for them in this energy efficiency business is pretty obvious. I think it's a question of balance, too, a bit, and that is, if you look at cases like the bank, the report that we worked on, and then there was cost of how many people died from pollution. This is a politically sensitive area. Common sense can tell you. Many are not. So it's, I wouldn't say because of one case like that you say, well, we shouldn't help them on statistics. I mean, it's too big of a sea And so maybe a little bit of balance, a little bit of common sense, and a little pushing too.
I mean, what's striking is that actually within a couple of weeks after the whole hoobla-hoo about the World Bank and those stats, the OECD issued their environmental performance review report that had very similar numbers. The Chinese signed off on it, published it, and someone asked the question. There was a chap from Paris who was on a screen, and I was the DC moderator, and someone asked that question. He said, well, why did they release yours but not the World Bank's? And he said, I have no idea. But it could be, who knows, the personalities involved, the timing, where it was situated in the report.
China is no monolith. I mean, you have all kinds of different people saying all kinds of things in contradiction of each other.
Yep.
So I think probably in this kind of case,
within
got
weeks.
angry.
Yeah.
What is this?
No, we have plenty of time. I think for logistically, there are 4 of you on the table. I'm going to hand you to Robert, and then you just ask your question, and then pass it to Red and move it on down.
Hi, I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. About a month ago, China raised the consumer prices for gasoline and diesel. And I wonder what has happened since then. Has the price been absorbed? Has the supply changed? Have they changed the subsidies to the oil company? And do they have a plan for continual price rises over a period?
Okay, pass it to her.
I was in Beijing the day that came out, and it was all in the newspapers, and the taxi drivers who were directly affected were all talking about that. My impression was that it was very broadly accepted as something that had to happen. So I didn't see. The cab drivers were not screaming in anger, but of course they weren't happy. Now, John, isn't the gasoline price now, that was an 8% increase, isn't it?
That's right.
It's very close to the U.S. price, no?
It is very close to the U.S. price. Yeah.
So in the U.S. price internationally is quite low, as everyone knows. So a lot of it, too, is then different kinds of products. I think diesel is price is the lowest of them, no? Or?
Yeah. It is still priced rather low by world standards.
But gasoline, it's a question of how much it's taxed, not subsidy. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Right. And there has been a fuel tax, at least in principle, approved long ago, but never implemented. There never seems to be a good time to implement a motor fuels tax. From the perspective of the refiners, an 8% rise is welcome, but hardly makes a difference. It doesn't push them from the red into the black. And those in the refining industry that we've spoken with about this have essentially brushed it off as too little to make any real difference to them. So.
Do you have numbers for like yuan per liter?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Anyone know the price of gas in Beijing right now? Okay,
about $2.49 a gallon in June. That was my own
China?
Calculation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, okay.
$2.49.
Yeah, and
Right.
I calculated. I just did the conversion.
And that was in June, and then they raised 8% or so. So
270.
close
Fairly,
to U.S.
fairly
is
consistent
maybe,
across China.
Okay. And you had your question?
Jean Garrison, University of Wyoming. My question has to do with an issue I think is important for the success of energy efficiency, and that's the issue of technology transfer. One part of it is who pays, because I think at the table at the APP and other places there's a call for the West and the United States to pay. But also on the flip side, what about intellectual property issues? And I'm just curious what you've seen in terms of people's concerns on the efficiency side or in power generation for intellectual property theft, and kind of, what's your sense of this issue, and can it be overcome?
Thanks. And if you could pass the mic 4 people down. Okay.
Not an area I know as well as some other. Let me take a stab at it. I think the one that generating a lot of interest in the last few months is the IGCC, so the how do we say, integrated gas
Cycle.
combined cycle, right? Where there's interest in U.S. technology, Chinese are interested in developing, and there's, if you look at it in a financial sense, it by itself, it's not going to pay. So who is going to come up with the difference? My understanding is that the Chinese government is going to move on the IGCC for sure. It's a question of how. And it's not clear yet how they want to move on that. It's not clear whether or not we get involved in that. And it's not clear how the technology would be developed and those costs paid. I think in general, with any of those things, if you take a very long-term perspective, you can say to yourself, well, the one who stands to gain from this technology is China. The one who stands to lose without having such technology is China. And in the end, I would expect that they start to drive it in terms of learning technology, beginning to develop. And if 20 years from now, I would be surprised if they're not the ones who are driving the whole IGCC agenda, them and other big coal users like them. So it's a question of over the long term. I think you're looking at from the Chinese side at how they can develop the technology, and so it's a role of not, okay, we can borrow this all from the West and they will do all of our technology development for us. I don't think so, but how to work that out. The intellectual property rights, most of those large companies have worked out things in the past. I don't know the details, but I do know that a lot of, I think Martin knows actually something about that. A lot of the big companies have done major technology transfers into China. I don't know if I answer your question very well.
Jonathan, did you want to add anything to that one, or
Yes,
you don't have to if
yeah.
you don't feel forced?
Well, who pays, of course, is an issue, and the Chinese position is that they would like to see buy downs of expensive technologies, and look at IGCC as kind of an AIDS vaccine, AIDS drug or vaccine, and that position doesn't seem like it's going to go very very far. The CDM, a few years ago, if you'd asked me if the CDM was going to go anywhere in China, it seemed like it was not going to go anywhere very fast, and now China's the biggest source of credits, and the CDM now can be applied for more efficient power plants. And we'll see how that works out in China. That could be a source of funding for at least a few, maybe ultra supercritical plants. It's a moving baseline, and so you avoid the problem of funding far out into the future what is becoming conventional technology. But it helps to accelerate the process of bringing the technology into China. And in China, once a good thing has been used in one place, it tends to spread fairly quickly, as you've all heard. Intellectual property rights is it's an issue that's going to be sticking around for quite some time, yes, and one of the key technologies that China wants, of course, is gasification for IGCC, for poly generation, for its coal to liquids, and I think that's an area where we're going to be seeing a lot of activity. If we can see a solution to IPR issues for coal gasification technologies, we're going to see a lot of movement. And this plays into CCS as well.
Okay, and then Martin, I think.
Yeah, Martin Weil, China energy consultant. You took the words out of my mouth when you talked about the clean development mechanism. Yes, there is indeed a large volume of activity. I'm curious on both of your opinions about how much of that activity is really driven by the CDM and would or would not have happened anyway. I know that's a very key question for the CDM itself. And that's one question I wanted to ask. The other, if you don't mind my asking a second question. On the one hand, there's a very strong promotion of renewable energy in China, and there's certainly, if you look at the number of projects being initiated, it's certainly moving. On the other hand, you hear the head of the Chinese Renewable Energy Industry Association publicly complaining that restrictive regulations on the pricing of wind power to off-takers is really holding back a lot of development. And this is, I guess, Robert, sort of what you're talking about. I mean, there's different thrusts at the same time. And I'm curious how you guys evaluate the effectiveness of the various moves to promote renewable energy.
Thank you.
Let me take the one on renewables, and that is, say, grid prices for wind power are an issue in all countries. I think in China you have these huge arguments. We financed a project, or we wanted to finance a project. It was quite a while ago. It was the turn of the decade, 2000, 2001, wind farm in Inner Mongolia. Everything was appraised, everything ready to roll. The grid in the end said, I don't think so. I'm not paying. And that was it. And we couldn't get past it. That wind farm now is being developed, and they've reached an agreement on the price. So it's a I think it's the kind of thing that you have to roll up your sleeves and get into the implementation. There's no easy way out, and you're going to have basic contradictions that somehow have to be overcome. What more can I say about that? I think in general the government support helps, but like everything in China, you may have a very sort of vague support, vague expression of, okay, this is in the national interest, and then when it comes down to money and who's going to gain and who's going to lose, it starts to get pretty nasty. And they're probably not the only ones, but and we spent a lot of our time in the middle of that trying to pull something off.
Jonathan?
Yes. Well, the problem with good pricing, the renewable energy law is certainly not a magic bullet. It encourages grids to buy electricity, and says that preferential pricing should be given. But you run into the whole issue of utility sector reform, which is proceeding slowly at its own pace. You have problems with dispatch as well, which is a problem not just for renewables but also for more efficient coal-fired generators as opposed to the less efficient ones. And it is a problem that is very complex and will take time to resolve. But I think you can see that those kinds of problems do get resolved simply by the difference in speed with which wind is developing compared to, say, 5 or 6 years ago, when a lot of people thought it wasn't going to go anywhere fast. And now it's on track for being at about the same scale as nuclear, as I mentioned earlier. So,
okay.
Regarding CDM, I'm far from an expert, so I'll have to punt on that one.
I haven't seen somebody really, and I think it would be not a simple thing to analyze what is the leakage on all those projects, what would have happened otherwise, because it's a hypothetical question, a pretty tough one. I've seen many wonderful CDM projects. I've seen ones too. I mean, China is really booming on this business, like someone else said. I've seen other ones where you kind of scratch your head and said, well, what is this? So,
Martin, could you pass the mic over to Derek, and then we'll go to the back of the room. And then this side of the room, if you all are interested, we'll move it over to you.
Derek Vollmer from the National Academy of Sciences, and I do have a question, but I'd like to comment very quickly on the data issue, because it was a big theme in our recent research with the Chinese, and one of our key recommendations was that China needs to continue building its capacity to collect data and also work on making it available. And Jonathan is certainly probably the leading expert on interpreting Chinese statistics, and he pointed out one of the challenges is that as soon as the government releases these statistics, everyone takes that and runs with it. There's very little scrutiny of it. So one challenge is making this available to people who can scrutinize it so that the data that does become more widely available is accurate. Now, my question is probably specifically to Bob, and it's on building efficiency. And as he pointed out, the Chinese government has set lots of great standards, very ambitious targets, but by some of their own estimates, up to 95% of their new construction is still largely inefficient. I just stayed in a government-financed hotel in November, and this was brand new, and it was about 28 degrees Celsius in the room, and our whole delegation was calling down saying, how can we lower the temperature? They said, oh, open the window.
What province was it?
This was in Beijing.
In Beijing.
Yeah, I think this might have been actually financed by the NDRC, which is ironic.
But which hotel was that?
It was the Hanhua, or Oriental Bay, I think.
Okay,
but anyway, and you can drive down the streets and you see these very inefficient air conditioning units being put up in the new construction. Where is the disconnect, and what are the real challenges to making these building efficiency standards meaningful?
Good question. The building codes is kind of a long story. Started in '87, the first ones they issued, and I think no one paid the slightest attention to those. Then it came 1995, 96, where they increased the way they set the standard is compared with the hypothetical old building. It's to the energy consumption is to be reduced by a certain amount, and they will then the standards will include how many watts for the leakage through the walls and the windows and so forth. Originally it was 30%, then in 95 and so forth it was 50%. We started looking into this business about year 2000. At that time in Beijing, maybe the fellow in charge of implementing the standard said they were doing 30%. And that was his best face forward, okay? And as you go further north, you find that at that time, this was pretty widely ignored. 2002 started to change, and it started to see some things really starting to cut at provincial level, so that my own impression is that in most places where it's new commercial development, especially residential development, that the standards have really started to come in. Now, this is the 50% standard, and so when you're looking at insulation or windows and so forth, and it is better than before. If you go to the north, though, there is a whole nother piece of the puzzle, and that is, it may have to do with your hotel. If you use the old heating system is a vertical pipe, single flow system that comes, Russians developed, and it was in place all the way from Warsaw to Vladivostok, the whole place, and China followed also. Wonderfully simple, wonderfully cheap in terms of capital investment, and hideously inefficient. Basically, you shove down as much heat down the pipe as possible, and there's no way of regulating anything. So the consumer, you cannot turn off anything, because you'll just turn off the next consumer, because there's no way to adjust. Your price is based on cubic meters. You have no idea what you consume because it's not measured. And what's the other one? Also in China, traditionally you don't pay, your unit pays. So this whole thing started to change 2001, 2002. So then again, so at a very senior level, there came down directives. This heat reform, they call, has to move. We want to see this in 5 years. Change everything. So this is the stretch goal. As you get down into the provinces, though, starting to change. So you see now new, and if in Beijing they're building residential buildings where it's not the new type of heating system inside, that's against the law. And I have not seen that for 3 or 4 years. But just to back up, I was once in Harbin. I went to a French demonstration project, a wonderful energy efficient building. It was done state of the art. It was 28 degrees inside because you couldn't adjust the heat because of the old system. So it's how do you put those two together? So I don't want to talk about this too much, but trying to link those two, we developed a project especially for that, 2003, edging along, trying to get different cities to put the two together. Tough implementation problem, important. Eventually, we will get there. Probably a 10-year effort.
And you're focusing on municipalities.
Yeah, it's the municipality that counts. They're the ones in charge of the enforcement. They're the one in charge of the heat price. They're the one in charge of the heat reform. So Beijing is probably a bit better than some. On the heat reform, worse than some. Doing reforms in Beijing is amongst the hardest cities for many reasons.
But I know that Natural Resources Defense Council, they've done a lot of work in Chongqing.
That's true.
Helping them work with, they were innovative in helping them rewrite their building codes and actually bringing in the construction companies and the government people. Why are we bringing these companies? And they're like, well, they're making the stuff. And so I think it was a great example that I hope can be replicated more in cities.
Yeah, I think their work, especially in the south, having to do with air conditioning and cooling load and so forth. But a lot of work to do.
Help set the standards for energy efficient air conditioners.
Well,
right?
I think that this is an area, we were talking earlier about this. This is an area where cooperation with the U.S. can really help. It's all about implementation, and what China is going through now with implementing building standards is something that the U.S. has gone through as well. And there's a tremendous amount of experience at the state level, at municipal level, that is directly transferable to China. And how do we transfer that? Well, we take people from here and send them over there with the appropriate interpreters and have them mix it up. It's very easy to do, and will help China along tremendously.
Okay, we got this gentleman there, and then you pass it to Mayu. Then give the mic to the guy in the back behind you, please. Thank you. Okay.
Good morning. I'm from the Chinese Embassy. My name is Shao Zheng. I've got a question just to follow up on the excellent presentation. You mentioned about the energy crisis in China, and what do you see as the best way out for energy? The new energy, is it from the wind power or the atomic power or the hydropower? Because we know that recently many people focus on the Three Gorges project and its environmental impact, some of the negative impact. Do you think China should still develop those big hydropower plants or rely on the new resources?
Thank you.
My own feeling is China probably in the end need everything it can mobilize. I don't role of nuclear power. My own mind, I don't know. I mean, to be just very frank, I don't know the best role and what I think about that. Large-scale hydro, I think China still has some sites as less than people might think, and the contribution might be less than, I mean, as he was showing, China can eat up so much power so fast that the contribution may not be as big as possible. I think hydropower really depends how you do it. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at medium-sized hydro plants or small ones or large ones, it's very project-specific. I have high hopes on the renewable front, personally. I also think, though, that you have big sort of leaps in technology going to have to be made if we're going to really do something on the renewable side, having to do with solar energy and hydrogen and so forth. I'm not in terms of sort of long-term technical options is not really my strength. I guess for me, there's Princeton University, Robert Sokolow has a good way of looking at, say, greenhouse gas problem. It's maybe true for China's energy problem too, and that is to draw a pie and say all the different pieces that have to be done, they all need to contribute. And I myself look at the energy efficiency one and say, okay, that's the one, I'll work on that one.
If I can ask, kind of following up, because I mean, you both kind of said it, but because I get people calling me all the time, and maybe I can finally have a right answer in terms of, I mean, energy efficient. You say they have to do everything, but when you look at you just pulled it up here, and you're probably going to answer this, that energy efficiency can make a significant impact, and if
you still have to increase supply.
You still have to increase supply.
No, there's no way you don't have massive increases of supply as well. There's no way. You can do the numbers till the cows come home, those supply has to go up, and it's a question of how. I've never seen a model that didn't show that.
Okay.
Huh?
You need everything. And China is, seriously, and China's really already on the right track. There is no magic bullet. When I go to China, I'll go down to the provinces. People say, give us your technology, and look out the window. It's often already there, right? China has already a lot of the world's best technology. It just needs to be more widely distributed, more widely used. It's the same situation every other country faces. And efficiency is very important in the near term. China's definitely on the right track there, and I think the IA's member countries can learn a great deal from China. I think China's going to be exporting lessons to the rest of the world. I've seen delegations from a delegation from Vietnam that was sent a group to Beijing to learn about how efficiency standards were done for household appliances. So I believe China is going to become a source of innovation for the rest of the world in the not too distant future. It already is for some things. One area where maybe China could do better, as the rest of us could, is to have a very broad and much stronger portfolio of R&D. And that, I think, needs and there is a lot of opportunity for joint R&D. The U.S. and China are particularly well suited for collaboration on cleaner coal technologies. It's an area where there's a lot of long-standing cooperation, and if an agreement can be reached at a high enough level to push forward on this in the same way that maybe some of our countries approach space programs, we could do a lot.
Okay, I think. Yep.
Just to add, a good way to visualize that is look at China's energy consumption per capita.
Yep.
And then you'll see how many countries consume how much more per capita than they do. Still, I think it's in the middle of the pack, and that kind of answer the question.
And the people, I've also heard a lot of people say too that in terms of looking at greenhouse gases, that they need to focus more on their industrial sector, because you can't really hold back the consumers because they're so hungry. They need this energy. I mean, what is it? They're 11% per capita of what we are. So, last question or comment in the back.
Yeah, Josh Leipes. I'm a journalist. I just had a question. I wonder if you could talk briefly about what efforts are being made by China's domestic lenders in terms of sustainable banking. Where you see that going.
Good question.
Because there is this new green bank thing that everyone's talking about, supposedly.
I don't know
in China.
Well, I think let's see. China's banking industry, in terms of being reformed and turning into a market-based system, still has a long way to go. So this is a reform that's just playing out, and a lot in the banking industry is going to change over the next handful of years. I think increasingly when you look at things like sustainable development and banks' interest in doing more innovative things, it depends on the bank. And it's hard to look at Chinese banks in a monolithic way that way. So I've seen some of the how do we say that they're not private but shareholding banks. They're quite aggressive about trying out new things in terms of creative ways of doing projects which may be less traditional. You also see then from the policy banks are supposed to develop funnel money for things like energy efficiency or pollution control, but this is coming in maybe the old way. So as a policy-based lending that's under directive. How far that goes, how constructive that is, how much that really works in the market system, you have to see, look at the cases. I'm optimistic. We have a new project in the bank on energy efficiency that should come for approval to our board in about 3 months. This is energy efficiency financing through 3 banks. Huaxia Yinghang is Huaxia Bank is one of them. Another one is the Import-Export Bank in their domestic business in China. And what we try to do with them is to develop an energy efficiency lending program. So only looking at energy efficiency loans, how do you do them, how do you appraise them, what makes them, they are different, what makes them different from a lending point of view, how do you overcome some of the risks, how do you make alliances to develop them, the technical side of the projects, to identify them, et cetera. $200 million loan. More funds could be spent on that. Our bank may do more on-lending arrangements like that, but I think the key is trying to get the Chinese banks to pick up the business. So we're going to give it a try in that particular area. That's easier than your pollution control in that energy efficiency will tend to have good returns, strong ones, fast ones. It gets harder when the returns are a little more stretched out, and the bank wants to be commercial, so he's going to look at the bottom line.
Okay. Oh, okay, Helen, you have a quickie?
Yeah, may I just point out, I'm Helen Rafael, Resources for the Future. May I just point out that any available large-scale river projects for hydro that are still reasonably available, obviously the Yellow River is not, the Yangtze River has its, are in southwest China, and that would really get into trouble with water supply to Southeast Asia and to Burma. So I don't think that hydro is still on the table for all this. Try everything.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I want to thank both of our speakers for excellent talk. I mean,